Well, I know lunch is... I'll do this really quick, I think. I want to start with saying, just first of all, thanks for having me. I am your token American, but I'm actually not American. I even have my Swedish passport with me here, I think, yes, so I'm not just a crazy American. But I represent a company called Token. We started about 2 years ago in Silicon Valley. My co-founder is someone you probably don't know by name, but you know what he's created, but among other things, this thing, the optical mouse. The optical mouse. He was also the inventor of one of the first search engines, InfoSeek, if you remember that. They were sold to Disney for a few $1 billion. So we started the company a couple of years ago, you know, these kind of crazy Silicon Valley mind saying that, hey, payments really are, you know, it's a problem. It's slow, it's hard to use, it's insecure and all these things. So let's fix that, really sort of garage style. So we started on this vision and we went off, built things, prototyped, iterated, and started to talk to American banks primarily, JP Morgan and Bank of America, Wells Fargo and all these guys. And they said, guys, this is amazing what you guys are building. However, why don't you come back when you have a big bank? And so it was this typical catch-22. This is chicken-egg problem, essentially. At the same time, you know, on my vacation back to Sweden, I read up on PSD2. And I called Steve, my co-founder, and said, Steve, we got to change focus here. The happening is in Europe, because their demand is exactly for what we're building, which is an open banking platform. So sort of fast forward a little bit now. We are now split between San Francisco and London. We're serving Europe out of London. And we just closed a significant Series A round of financing from top-tier European VCs and a bank. We just announced last week OP Bank in Finland, which is the largest bank in Finland, as a customer. And so we're making great progress in Europe now. We have another very significant project underway with a large global bank in the instant space. Fedor Bank is another partner, customer of ours in Germany. So yeah, I'm happy to be here to talk a little bit more about what we do and why we do it. So open banking, what's the fuss, right? Why are we talking about open banking? Well, the promise of open banking is, of course, that we deliver value to our end customers at the end of the day. It should speed up innovation, it should reduce cost, it should provide more services. You know, the first instance of that is, of course, PSD2. So, you know, the regulators, the European Commission, basically prescribed to the European banks that here's what you're going to have to do. And we talked about it here earlier this morning about what the goals of that was. Of course, reduce cost and it's spur innovation and all these great things. But I dare ask, how many banks do we have in here today? We have any hands? Okay. So are you concerned about PSD2? Raise your hand. Okay, yeah, I get it. All right. So that's not unusual, right? In fact, banks essentially have two options. And the first option is to go on the defense. Defense means you comply with the regulation. Right? And I'd say, had you asked me 6 months ago, or maybe 9 months ago, probably 80% of the banks in Europe would have said, yeah, we're going to comply, we're going to go on defense. But it's changing. More and more banks, especially the large banks, are taking a much more offensive approach to PSD2 and realize that there is potential in this. There are opportunities to generate new revenue, to find new customers. So, you know, going from this defensive mode to offensive mode has literally just taken, I would say, 6 to 9 months. And it does differ in different markets, there's no doubt about that. So in the Nordics, for example, and in the Netherlands, the UK, they are fairly progressive. And as you know, they're far ahead with their technology and EID systems and so on. But we're seeing this sort of trickling down throughout Southern Europe as well. And the fact is, though, that offense is the best defense. If you go on defense, if your decision is to simply comply, chances are, or rather the risk is, that you'll get eaten by your competitors. And that's typically not a good option, right? The other interesting aspect in today's banking world is that interest rates are near zero, or in some countries they're even negative. So how does a bank make money? Well, the new revenue sources are going to come from those that are exposed by open banking solutions, such as the data. So data is essentially the bank's new interest in the future. Fully convinced of that. And when you start to open up and you start to not only allow third parties build applications on your own infrastructure, but also build your own application and expose them, there's phenomenal applications that are being thought of right now that really generate new revenue. I think one of the most sort of straightforward ones is you banks have spent millions of dollars on building out KYC systems. Right? You KYC your customers, you do a great job on that, it costs you a lot of money, it's time to get a return on that. Right? One way is for, sell that KYC service to, car rental firms or hotels or whoever needs to KYC their customers. So open banking really is a great opportunity. Now, the success of this really comes through the ecosystem. And you can build your own platform, and the other bank can build their own platform, and then we end up in fragmentation. That's not really ideal, because for those that build applications on top of these, whether it's merchants or fintechs, it becomes very difficult if you're going to serve 1,000 different APIs, 1,000 different solutions. So we needed an ecosystem approach, and this has been done before. I mean, Microsoft was the first one to do this with Windows, of course. Apple followed in the last 8 years or whatever, and one of the more successful ones, which you may or may not know about, is Salesforce. They have the App Exchange, which is essentially a B2B marketplace for applications that run on top of Salesforce.com. Tremendously successful, generates billions of dollars a year, not only for their partners, but for Salesforce, Microsoft, Apple as well. So now what? If you remember the movie, right? The fish came out of the dentist office, they were in bags. Now what do? You have essentially three options. Fortunately, misformatted here. But, on one end, it's DN, it's do nothing, right? You can do nothing. It's an option. I don't recommend it. The other one is you do it yourself. You build your own open banking platform to address PSD2, or you select something called COTS, which stands for Commercial Off-the-Shelf Product. Think of it's essentially a shrink-wrap product. It's a platform. There are a handful of vendors that address PSD2 and or open banking. We're, of course, one of them. Now, in selecting these solutions, you're going to have a long list of evaluation criteria. There are a lot of things you're going to look at, no doubt. But what it boils down to are essentially two things. It's time to market, and it's return on investment. And that's what we are focused on helping banks realize. So our solution, we call it the Token Open Banking Platform. It's not only for PSD2, by no means, but it does address fully the current RTS in its stand as it was released here a month or two ago. And there are a few key components to our solution. One is identity, so very much that Just talked about in EID systems. Very central to what we do is that we have an identity system, and it works across Europe. There's a very strong security element to it. So are you familiar with shared secrets? Yeah, you all use them every day. Shared secrets is when you use a username and password. Why are those bad? Well, because when you store these shared secrets at the bank or at Facebook or whatever it is, when the mass breach happens, bad things happen. And so shared secrets can be username and password, but it could also be payment card numbers, which is probably the most common mass breach. And so what we've done is that we've leveraged some of the new technology, actually not that new, but blockchain have been using it for some time, which is essentially public key cryptography. We don't use blockchain, but we've borrowed sort of some of the concept of it. And not only does it make it super secure, but the user experience that you can provide is also a lot better. And then it's an open API, of course, real-time transactions and real-time billing, so the ability to actually charge third-party providers, and you remember, well, you can't charge third-party providers under PSD2, and I'll tell you, yes, you can. And I'm happy to talk about that this afternoon. And also what we call programmable money. That's the little circle with a dollar sign in it. I'll get back to that in a second. So how we deliver this is essentially a layered approach. At the bank, there is a component called a bank service, and that it integrates with the bank's core infrastructure either directly or if they already have internal APIs. There are a number of ways of doing that. And then we have the token cloud. That's where essentially all the intelligence resides. The bank service is more or less stateless. It just sort of receives requests and verifies signatures, but all the intelligence is in the cloud. And then you have SDKs, whether they are clients or businesses or third parties developing on top of this platform. You can think of this a little bit like Google Apps, right? So Google Apps is a great tool because it is there and they constantly add features. You don't have to do anything. And this is the idea we have here as well, that we combine this sort of Google Apps model of constantly innovating, adding new features and functionality, but at the same time, give banks the control that they need through this bank service element. So back to programmable money. This is probably the most critical part of our solution. We call them smart tokens. Anyone familiar with smart contracts in the blockchain world here? All right. So these are somewhat similar to that. At the center of a smart token, you have an asset, and that can be, your current account, your bank account, and then you define terms and conditions that controls the access to that asset. And so, for example, if I make a purchase online, I create a smart token that says, this is for merchant XYZ. It's for 23 euros, it can be used within a certain time frame, and so on and so forth. And those rules are completely arbitrary. In an e-commerce transaction, it's pretty simple. It's on, 2-3 rules. But when you expand on this into a B2B environment where you can, trade financing or whether it's treasury applications, it becomes really, really interesting because it's so flexible in the sense that not only terms and conditions, but you can load these smart tokens with data. It could be the credit or the letter of credit or the bank guarantee, and anything you can possibly imagine digital can be added to a smart token. And last of all, we have a state. The state essentially is a point-in-time reflection, meaning that some of these rules are dynamic. Like if I create a smart token for a recurring payment, we need to keep track of how many times the smart token has been used. So the state is the one that keeps track of things that changes. So business model-wise, it's somewhat unique as well because we actually pay banks for participating in the token payment network. Happy to go into detail about that later on, but it's a novel idea and many banks like that. So the use cases that are being supported here, it runs the gamut, whether it's P2P, B2B, B2C, C2B, and so on and so forth, and of course between banks as well. So getting close to wrap this up here, and what I want to say here is that you are starting to dip your toes into the open waters of open oceans of open banking, right? And we're here to help you with that. We provide you the guidance through these open seas. We provide you the technology, we provide you the advisory, and we'll make sure you get that. That's our promise. So let's start the journey. It starts after lunch, I guess, at one of these sessions. I'm happy to go. I will go through in much more detail about the solution. I'll give you a demo of how this works in a B2C scenario as well with our mobile app and things like that. Thank you.